3 from the perspective of Quintis. I woke up early today with one goal in mind: to finally paint out a warning on the nearby water distribution tower that will scare away those miscreants who keep defecating there. Verbal warnings just aren't enough to keep them away, so, just to ensure that they understand the severity of defecating anywhere near this water tower, I wrote out, "Anyone who wants to defecate in this place is advised to move along." In case that wasn't enough to stop them, however, I also wrote out a threat that I fully intend to follow through with. If you act contrary to this warning, you will have to pay a penalty. Children must pay a silver coin, slaves will be beaten on their behinds. And having completed this very important job of keeping the water clean in my part of Pompeii, I decided to reward myself with a walk through the Forum and a nice bath before the day really got started. Walking through the Forum brought me a great sense of peace, especially since I was among throngs of people completely unaware of the fact that I did such great things for them. And for this peace, I made sure to send up thanks to our patron goddess, Venus. But I also made sure to acknowledge everyone else, especially since I was walking past the temples to Apollo and Jupiter on my way to the bath. Didn't want to anger someone and incur some divine wrath. Finally, I was just outside of the baths. The sun had only risen a few hours ago when suddenly there was a violent earthquake. The earthquake caused the shingles on roofs to clatter, various animals around the Forum to panic, and the people to hold on to anything that was fragile enough to break from the tremors. My first thought was to be worried about the piping that spread throughout the town, as well as how I would get a bath if there was an issue with it. This thought was soon dispelled, however, when everyone began to talk of, among the various damages caused by the earthquake, a fire on the distant Mount Vesuvius. At first I didn't quite understand. I thought, now why would an earthquake have set the mountain aflame? But when I saw the smoke billowing from the top of the mountain, it was the only explanation I could think of. Fortunately, before everyone could panic, a couple of officials came by and calmed things down. And once everyone was somewhat calm, a group of priestesses worshipping Isis came by, assuring everyone that they would beg the goddess for mercy, which caused a good amount of people to truly begin to calm down and continue what they were doing, though they still appeared wary of further tremors, as would happen with past earthquakes in the area. Another difference was how they would look at Mount Vesuvius, keeping one eye on the distant mountain while keeping about their activities. I decided, after this event, I would go to see if the baths were still operational, and hopefully get cleaned up. Thank the gods they were open though, so I just managed to get cleaned up before heading out to a nearby thermopolium to get some warm food and hopefully ask others what they thought of Mount Vesuvius. While I ate some bread at the thermopolium, I did just that and asked the owner about Mount Vesuvius. He seemed slightly concerned and mentioned something about old stories of the mountain catching fire, but generally he and everyone else I talked to were not worried in the slightest, at least not until after midday. I was just heading back to see if my message was effective, or if people continued to defecate near the water distribution tower, when another tremor hit, this one much stronger than the first. This time I was also paying attention to Vesuvius, and saw as it seemed to just explode, causing a large plume of smoke and debris to rise into the sky. I was both terrified and in awe of the spectacle, and just as I was beginning to wonder if the gods themselves were fighting on the mountain, it began to rain rocks. This is when I was convinced that we had somehow angered the gods. There was no titanic battle, rather we were receiving divine punishment. So, instead of checking on my measly message, I figured it would be smart to hide and see if I could take shelter against the painful pumice falling from the sky. Heading towards my home was a painful and terrifying experience. People were running through the streets, animals were screaming, and the rocks falling down created a small roar as they drummed against flesh and stone alike. As for myself, I tried to use the lid that would typically cover a nearby well as protection against the falling rocks. I may have been obsessed with keeping our life-giving water clean, but that meant nothing right now. Not when the gods themselves might strike us down at any minute. After what felt like an eternity of traveling through the streets, getting hit by panicking people and rocks alike, I finally made it home. I was so glad to see that the slaves had put a cover over the impluvium so that at least our water would be clean. And it felt amazing to be inside and away from the tremors going on, though I could still feel them and rocks were still falling at such a rate that they were beginning to pile up on top of the cover for the impluvium. When I saw this, I cursed the slaves and began ordering them to cover up the compluvium as well. Couldn't believe they forgot such a thing. Looking outside, I could see that Pompeii was in chaos. Rocks and ash were piling up everywhere, and, though it was only a few hours past midday, the sky was dark as night. Statues that had been around since before I was born were cracking and crumbling. This was no longer the Pompeii I knew, and the only thing I could do was hide inside of my house, cowering and praying to the gods for mercy. While praying for mercy, the ash had grown so dense in the air that I had trouble breathing. Soon I was even gasping for breath, trying to cover my mouth and nose with the clothes I was wearing. I thought about trying to go outside, but it looked even worse there. The ash and rocks were really piling up now. Plus, the slave I ordered to cover the compluvium seemed to have run off. I could see that the level of rock and ash was enough just to come below my knee, and as I made this observation, a large cracking sound happened above my head. At first, I was confused and somewhat panicked, as this was quite different from the sound of rocks that had become the norm. But as the ceiling collapsed on top of me, I realized I was right to be panicked, and I died under that pile of rocks, ash, and pumice. I should have just run for it.